Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we have a good show for you this week. We're going to be covering all the Duck games from the past week, which started out well, and then, it didn't end up so well. So we'll go into all of that and get you caught up on the four games that happened. We've got some news about some former Mighty Ducks and Anaheim Ducks that we're going to talk about towards the end of the show. We've also got some updates on some of the prospects as well that we're going to get to, and of course fan questions as well. But we'll start off going back this week to the Montreal game where the Ducks were at home. At this time, Montreal was the best team in the league, and the Ducks brought them in, and they defeated them, Eddie. They beat them 2-1 in this game. Raquel got a goal and Fowler got a goal. The Ducks built a 2-0 lead. Montreal did score one late in the third, and with a little bit of shenanigans at the end, but the Ducks were able to hold on and win this one.
Yeah, and it was a goaltending battle in this game. That was pretty much it. It was Price versus Gibson in the end. Yeah, Gibson did get the win, but both goalies just played amazing in this game. Price stopped 36 of 38, and Gibson stopped 39 of 40. So a great game for him. It's definitely his best game of the season. Hopefully for him, that starts getting him going in the right direction. We still expect him to be the number one and play 50 to 60 games this season. So for him to have a big game like this against one of the best teams in the NHL and a team who can actually score goals this season, it was huge for him to step up and make those 39 saves. And then as for the Ducks as a whole, I think they just played a strong game. They won the face-off battle. They out-hit them. They scored on the power play. Penalty kill was perfect. I think it was a complete game for them, and it was probably up to this point their strongest game defensively of the season.
Yeah, and it was a good game, like you said. A good test. As you said, goalie battle as well, and the Ducks were able to pull this one out. And I thought it was a fun ending, to say the least, in this one, though. It looked like the Ducks were going to cruise to a 2-0 victory, and Andrew Shaw made it interesting. He scored a goal, and then later in the third, right after that goal, basically, he got a penalty, and then he went to the box, and let's just say he wasn't too happy. He ended up breaking his stick over his knee. He banged it against the glass. He ended up getting booted out of the game from that. He then goes, off the ice into the tunnel for Montreal. He knocks over the rack of all the sticks and kind of puts the exclamation point on the game almost at that point. Though the Ducks did get a power play. A penalty was called right after that on the Ducks. And so it still was a little bit nerve-wracking at the end, even though the Ducks did, pull it out with the one goal victory, but a little bit of entertainment there at the end, Eddie. Kind of the Shaw we're used to seeing on the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that he had a little bit of a temper tantrum. He's that type of hockey player, and he boils over pretty easily. And it was just a dumb play. You do a good thing, you score a goal to get your team back into it. You're within one goal. You got about at the time, it was about 2 minutes, I believe. 1 or 2 minutes left.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
So you've got a chance to tie the game, pull the goalie, and then he takes a dumb penalty. And I'm not going to complain. It helped the Ducks win the game. But are we really surprised that Shaw had a temper tantrum in the penalty box? I don't really think so. We've seen antics from him plenty of times in the playoffs for Chicago, so I'm not too surprised that he turned a positive into a negative so quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a good win for the Ducks. A little bit of entertainment there for at least us on the Anaheim side at the end. And the Ducks pulled out this one, and then they ended up going on their road trip to Western Canada, where they carried the momentum into Vancouver. And Vancouver's been towards the bottom of the Pacific, and the Ducks ended up pulling out this game as well. You had Silfverberg scoring. Kasse finally gets his first goal. Cogliano scores as well, and the Ducks, they took out the lowly Vancouver Canucks 3-1 in this one, Eddie.
Yeah, and it was a strong game for Gibson again in this game, and for the whole team as well. We thought, after the Montreal game and then after this one, they were starting to build up. and started to get on a roll here. And they only did generate 24 shots in this game. Got a couple. Obviously, Cachet got really lucky on the goal that he scored. Cogliano and Theodore had a pretty good combination at the end of the game there, and then obviously Silverberg in the beginning, and then the only goal that Gibson did get scored on was a bad bounce off the stanchion right to Henrik Steen. There's not much he could really do on that play. So, I mean, a great game. They dominated the faceoffs like they've done for most of the season this year. They only got the one power play, so they weren't able to score on it, but the penalty kill was perfect in this game as well. And I think it was a strong effort. They played a really, really tough game against one of the best teams in the league, and they came in this one and played a strong effort and came out with a win in this one too. So I think they were, at least through these first two games, without trying to foreshadow into the next games, they were starting to build some momentum.
Yeah, and we talked about this on the last couple shows, with the Ducks doing well in one game and then, the next game coming out flat. And, this was kind of one of those games where you thought, okay, they're going to play Vancouver. The Ducks have kind of had their number for a while, and the Canucks aren't playing too well. But it was good to see the Ducks come out and win this game. Like you said, they pretty much dominated this game really until the third period after that, crazy bounce, like you mentioned, on that clearing attempt. It went off one of the stanchions, came to Eriksson. Eriksson finds Henrik Sedin right next to the side of the net there. 7 minutes left to go in the game, and then Vancouver, wakes up basically and really starts owning the ice in the final 5-6 minutes of the game. But Cogliano puts it away there. So I would say it was a good effort all the way around. Maybe 4 or 5 minutes there where Vancouver dominated, but only because they had gotten that goal and gotten some momentum. But otherwise, a good game for the Ducks, and they then went on to take on Edmonton, who you remember they had shut down and beat back in Anaheim. And in this one, it didn't work out as well for the Ducks. This was kind of a frustrating game, though. I mean, the Ducks did get scored on first. They answered back. Kessler scored to tie the game. Edmonton scored again. You had Raquel answer in the third period. And then, of course, the Ducks go to overtime where they've had so much success. Just kidding. They haven't had any success. And in overtime, they end up losing this one. But this one was a frustrating one, Eddie. The Ducks really played well in the third period. I thought they could have won this one in regulation. They had a power play at the end of the third period that carried over into the overtime as well. And it's really one you thought the Ducks could have got 2 points out of.
Yeah, it was a really close game, but like you said, they had the chances at the end of the game to end it, a late power play that extended into overtime, 4-on-3, and they didn't really generate much on that power play either. They wasted a lot of time trying to find the perfect pass. They didn't really get too many golden opportunities on that power play. And then they get burned on a poor defensive play in their own end, where Draisaitl was left wide open in front of the net, and Sekera just found him, and it was an easy tap in for him. And it's unfortunate because they did play a solid game this game. It was a close game against a good team, at the time the best team in the Pacific Division. And it's a game you hope to win against. We talked about it before. Obviously, Vancouver and coming up in Calgary, they're not exactly challenging right now for the top 3 spots. But Edmonton is up there with the Sharks, and you want to beat these teams. You want to get the full 2 points. Even if you don't end it in regulation, at least get that extra point and get an advantage on them. And it's disappointing to lose the game. They had their chances. They just couldn't finish them.
Yeah, I mean, like we've talked about before, this is one of those 4-point, game situations. I mean, the Ducks did get a point out of it, but of course, Edmonton gets the 2, so they get 1 point, move up a little bit more. And it's definitely one that, like we talked about, the Ducks could have won. We're going to talk about the overtime stuff a little bit later and some of the fan questions as well, so we'll address that at that point. But, not a bad game for the Ducks. They didn't play poorly in this one. They, played pretty well. So, they had these 3 games. They got 5 points out of 6, still hanging around the top, top 3 or so in the Pacific Division. And the Ducks then ended up going to finish the road trip in Calgary, which we all know when the Ducks play Calgary, they're wild games, high scoring and whatnot. A couple different things happened that we found out before the game, like literally right before. We found out that Rickard Rakell was not able to play in this game. He had an upper body injury listed as day-to-day. We don't know exactly what the injury is, but we do know that it's supposed to not be related to the appendix or any of that kind of stuff. So maybe it's something else where he got banged up in a play in that Edmonton game, somewhere in there. I don't know exactly, but he was out. We found out that Camarosa came back. He played in this game, but this game, I don't know what to tell you. All I know is after the first period, it was pretty much all Calgary. They, Bernier started in net in this game, obviously because of the back-to-back situation. And the Ducks just had a meltdown in the second period, Eddie. I mean, they gave up 5 goals in the second period. They were down 6-1. They ended up losing this one 8-3. Calgary did get Johnny Gaudreau back in this game as well, and he ended up scoring the very first goal in this game, which Bernier would have liked to have that one back because that was way too easy. But nothing really went right for the Ducks until the end when they got a couple goals in garbage time. But I mean, this was just it's just a frustrating game all the way around, Eddie.
It's one of the worst games I've seen them play in a while too, and they just got outplayed. Simple as that. I mean, the first goal was a bad one. Kessler got them back into it, and then from then on, it was just Calgary just turned on to another gear, and it wasn't just like Gaudreau and Monahan and their best players turned it on. The whole team turned it on. They had 8 different goal scorers in this game, and almost everybody except for Greg Hathaway for them played over 12 minutes, over 13 minutes in this game. The only other guy who didn't was Ferland, but he left the game 42 seconds into his first shift. So, I mean, they had a great team effort in this game. Gaudreau comes back, he gets a goal and an assist. Monahan gets a goal and an assist for them as well. Bennett, Chiasson, Brouwer, Stajan, they all played great from this game. Pretty much everybody had a point for them except for Michael Frolik and then Ferland, who ended up leaving the game for their forward line. So just an all-around good effort for them, and just a poor game for the Ducks. And if you look at the stat line, it's not even like if you just looked at the stat line and didn't look at the score, you would never believe it was 8-2. I mean, the Ducks outshot them 33-25. They won the face-off battle. They grabbed a power play goal. Obviously, the penalty kill wasn't great. They only killed 1 of the 3 they had. But hits, blocks were equal, and Calgary ended up giving the puck way more. You don't expect to look at the score after that and see the team that dominated most of the categories end up losing 8-3. And it's hard to blame it on Bernier, and I'm not going to solely blame it on him. Anytime you lose 8-3, it's not just the goalie's fault. But it seems like after 2, 3, 4, they kind of just gave up, and Calgary took advantage of that, and they scored, five goals in 6 minutes? So, I mean, we've seen that happen to the Ducks a couple times, not as bad, but we saw it happen against Columbus where they scored 4 really early on in the first period, one of the first times we played them. So it's something that's happened more often than you would want it to this season for the Ducks. And we talked about this, how they seem to quit after they get scored on first, or they get scored on a couple times, and we saw that really badly in this game.
Yeah, I agree. After a few of those goals were scored, in the second period, it just was like an avalanche. Basically, I remember just sitting there watching it, and one goal scored, and you're like, okay, then another one, and then another one, another one. You're just sitting there going like, I mean, you just put your hands up in the air, and you're just like, really? Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of the fans were frustrated during the game, not just because of what was going on in terms of Ducks getting scored on, but a lot of people were like, why wasn't Bernier pulled? And so we didn't find out what it was until after the game. And, for some of you that, may have had this issue before, but I guess Gibson had some kind of a stomach issue. And Carlisle was referring to it as being a case of diarrhea, I guess, is what he said. So I don't know if Gibson ate something bad in Edmonton, or he ate something bad in Calgary, or he got sick somewhere. I don't know, but I guess Gibson was not 100%. That's why he didn't come in. So it wasn't Carlisle, testing Bernier or doing anything on purpose, towards Bernier. But that's what was going on. So he had to play in the rest of this game, and it's just a frustrating night for the Ducks. I mean, like you said, they get down by a few, and they just couldn't recover. And, the only bright spot was you had Kessler in this game. He got 2 goals. He leads the team with 11. Logan Shaw got his first goal as a member of the Anaheim Ducks. small potatoes, nothing worth anything in this game. But I mean, those are the only things that really happened. The Ducks did get a couple of those goals at the end, to make it a little closer, but just something to forget about and look forward to the homestand this week, Eddie.
Yeah, 8-3 looks better than 8-1, but you're still not getting any points from the game, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, and I was really surprised how candid Carlisle was with his comments at the end of the game. Normally, you would expect him to say, "Oh, he had an illness and he couldn't play," but he came out and described in very clear detail what was happening with Gibson in this game. So, I mean, hopefully, he should be okay, and
Yeah.
I would highly doubt that we see Bernier start against Carolina after letting in 8 goals against Calgary. So. Depending on how Gibson plays, they have 1 day of rest between each of these next few games. And Carolina is the easiest game. Then you got to play the Sharks, which is a very important game, especially where they are in the standings right now. And then you're playing a hot Ottawa Senators team after that on Sunday. I mean, if Gibson plays good against Carolina, he'll probably go for San Jose as well. And if he plays good in both those games, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked to see him play again in Ottawa if he's playing well. I mean, it's hard to go to Bernier after letting in 8 goals. And again, I'm not going to say it's his fault. That first goal was awful, but from there on, the whole team was just bad as a whole. But, I mean, anytime you let in 8 goals, it's difficult to go back to soon after that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'm pretty sure Gibson will go, at least in this, Carolina game. And hopefully he's fine. I haven't heard anything, different or whatnot. So we'll look for him to go in that game. And with some of the other moves that happened this week, we saw Wagner get sent back down to San Diego on the 5 Freeway Express or the train. I don't know what's going on, but him and Theodore have been logging more miles than I think anybody on this team. But they had an interesting game in San Diego. They did play the Bakersfield Condors. They were losing in that game. Stefan Nason scored with just over 9 seconds left to tie the game, and then Chris Wagner scored in overtime to win this game. So, Chris has been getting some more ice time down there. He went down a little while back and had a goal and 2 assists. So, good win for the Gulls. They've been on fire lately. They've been winning a lot of games. They had a stretch there of 8 games that they had won in a row. So, they really turned it around down there, Eddie.
Yeah, and they actually have a pretty good team. I mean, they don't have any all-stars prospect-wise, probably other than Brandon Montour. But they're just getting a good effort from a lot of people. I mean, Corey Trop has been really good for them. I don't think we expected that much offense from him, even at an AHL level. And then Kalle Kusila, who came over from St. Cloud in the NCAA, he's been good. Kevin Waugh has been good. They've just got production from a lot of different guys that you might not necessarily expected to produce at the level they are right now. And then I mean, obviously, as of late with the 8-game winning streak that they had, and they're sitting second in the Pacific, only a point behind Stockton. So I mean, they've just been doing really, really well lately. Hopefully they can continue it. Obviously, Wagner's going to be up and down all season. Theodore's probably going to be doing the same. I doubt Kase goes down anytime soon with the way he's playing. But I think they have enough depth between the Ducks roster and the roster they have down there right now that they can stay competitive and hopefully make a run in the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. The Gulls have been playing very well right now, turning it around after that poor start. And, we've got a couple writers that cover the Gulls. So we've got, our bi-weekly reports that come out. Look for those, and also we have some of the updates on the prospects as well that come out. So always check for those articles, which, we got an update on some of the other prospects too this week. We found out that Jacob Larson, Julius Nautanen, Sam Steele, and Troy Terry are all on the preliminary rosters for the World Juniors. We haven't heard about Max Jones yet. He's been injured if you didn't hear about that. So we kind of expect him to be in there too in the mix. But that's some, good news. I mean, some of these guys were on there last year as well, Eddie. But of course, it's always good to see these guys, do well and get a shot at the junior championship.
Yeah, I think we all expected Sam Steele to get a call up with the way he's been playing. Obviously, just came back from injury a couple games ago, but tonight he put up 2 goals in their overtime win for Regina in the WHL. And I mean, we expected him to get called up. Nattinen, who was a key piece in Finland's World Junior Championship last year. They're going to have no Laine, obviously. They're going to have no Puljujärvi, most likely. So he'll be a key figure and will most likely make the team. And then Larson as well. Just the experience alone and the caliber that he plays at, you would expect him to come over and play. So, those, not to say those three guys are locks, but I think they're definitely guys you would expect to be on the final roster, barring any injuries or any very poor play. I think Troy Terry's the surprise one. It'll be interesting to see if he does make the roster. Obviously, Max Jones, I assume, isn't there because of his injury right now, currently. But you would expect him to, depending on how severe the injury is, to be on the final roster once the World Junior Championship starts. But if he isn't, it'll be interesting to see if Terry can make the team and how well he does. To be honest, I haven't seen a ton of him. I know when the Ducks drafted him, there was a little bit of hype over him, kind of dropping so low because of his size. And he's had a pretty productive season in NCAA so far this season. So it'll be interesting to see how he does and if he can make the team. And it'll be a big achievement for him to make that World Junior Championship team.
Yeah, and with that, we'll keep you up to date on, what we hear about any of the other prospects that, are going to, hopefully make that final roster as well. We'll obviously provide updates and articles as it gets closer to that time. With that, we'll get to the fan questions. We have a handful of your questions. Every show we go through them and answer them and give you our opinions and analysis and what we think as far as where the team's going and the way the personnel and the coaching is going and whatnot. And with that, the first question, Eddie, we have gotten this week is from Patrick. He asks about Getzlaf and Perry and whether or not you should play them on separate lines. And if we do think they should be on separate lines, what should the line combinations be? And, I wrote an article about this a couple of weeks ago on the Hockey Writers, and I discussed this. And I thought it was something that the Ducks should try to do. I mean, the way that they've been playing right now, you've got Getzlaf and Perry. They both been getting tons of assists, but not scoring as much. I'm down for the Ducks to try and change it up a little bit, and if they're going to switch the line combinations around, I wouldn't mind maybe seeing something with maybe Ritchie, Kasse, and Getzlaf on one line. That might be something to look at, and maybe Perry, Rakell, and Vermette on one line is, just some ideas I've thrown out there. I mean, I don't think the lines have been doing terribly, but if they're going to change it up, that's something I've kind of looked at. Eddie, what do you think about switching it up a little bit, or do you keep the Twins together?
I think they could explore it. I don't know if putting Perry with anybody else is really going to help him break out of his goal-scoring slump, though, to be honest with you. I mean, the best passer on our team is Getzlaf. I mean, he sits second in the NHL only behind Connor McDavid in assists. I think eventually the goals are going to come for Perry. Splitting them up, does that really help him out? I'm not too sure. And then again, with the line combinations themselves, you're not going to get too different than they are now. We doubt that Cogliano, Silfverberg, and Kessler are going to be split up. They haven't been split up for what seems like forever now. They seem to be together every time they're out there. So again, you can't really do much. Vermette's going to obviously be a center on that third line, and then it's just depends on where you decide to put Ritchie, Kasse, Rakell, and Perry. So not much will change. I mean, Perry's obviously going to play right wing. Kasse is going to play right wing. So then Ritchie and Rakell are going to be playing on the left side. So it's either you have like a Rakell and Kasse with Getzlaf, or you have Ritchie, Getzlaf, Kasse, like you said. There's not too many options you can change if you're going to keep guys in their preferred positions, and I doubt we see anybody from the fourth line in Garber, Shaw, or Bull get moved up off of the fourth line. So I really don't know. To answer the question, would it be beneficial to separate them? Right now, I don't think so. There's not too much parity in the way you can separate the lines, but if they try it out, I'm not opposed to them trying it out for a game. And I think if you're going to try it out for a game, I think for the 3 games we have this week, the Carolina game is probably the game you'd want to do it for. They're the weakest opponent of the week. Not to say that they're an easy opponent, but if you're going to test some things out, I think it's better to test it out in that game than, say, test it out against the Sharks.
Yeah, I agree with you. If they're going to switch it up, that would be the time to do it. Another question that's kind of related to this too is Braden asks about the scoring. Basically, from game to game, it's not always been necessarily the same. But he also talks about Perry and him trying to set screens and get in front of the net as much, and kind of what's happened to that. And Perry's gotten a lot of criticism recently because of not being able to score, but I don't think it's so much as far as setting the screens necessarily, Eddie. I mean, I think that he's been in and around the net. He's getting the assists. He's not necessarily getting the goals. He's not scoring at goals from distance, but that's not really his game. His game has always been in and around the net. So I don't know if he's not necessarily setting enough screens, but maybe he's not getting in there enough when there's rebounds and things like that. But he's been close a few times, and it just seems at times he's just kind of been either in the wrong spot, or the puck goes the wrong way, or it goes off the post. Um, I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to describe what's been going on lately, and I do think he's going to pick it up and start scoring. But I don't see him really changing too much. I mean, it kind of goes back to the other question. If you're going to really change it around, then maybe you switch the lines up. But I mean, his overall play, it hasn't been great. Don't get me wrong, but it hasn't been terrible either.
Yeah, and really it is just getting that one and getting the confidence. And when you're a goal scorer and you go so many games without scoring a goal, you start to doubt your abilities. And I think for him, it's just finally getting that goal and continuing on from there. And as for him using the old play that he used to use, and a lot of players used to use, of kind of using the defenseman as a screen to take the shot, you just don't see that happen anymore. I mean, the game has changed so much over 2 seasons where you don't see a lot of things happen anymore. I mean, Ovechkin used to use that play every night. You would see him score a goal where he would use a defenseman as a screen. And yes, it still happens, but not to the regularity that it used to happen. And that's just defenders are quicker now. They're younger. They're faster on their feet. They make smarter plays. The defensive aspect of the game and the players that we have in the league right now, it's just a better level of defensive play, and it's harder for players to do that anymore. You don't have the enforcer defensemen anymore who are there just to fight. You don't see that often anymore. Usually you have 6 guys who are quality defensemen in the league, and it's difficult to make plays like that. So do I see him, that being an issue to why he hasn't scored? No, like you said, he is playing well. He's putting up more assists than we have ever really seen him do at this point in the season. He's just not burying the chances that he's getting, and this that happens. I mean, goal scorers go through slumps. This is a really, really bad one, probably one of the worst of his career so far. But we still know he can score goals, and he is a pure goal scorer. And do I still think he can get 30 goals this season? Yes. He just needs to finally get that one. And it's a matter of time now. I mean, good goal scorers will adapt and find the back of the net. And for him, I don't see it lasting too much longer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think as soon as he can break through and get one, then I mean things will start going. I mean, he started the season all right, better than he did last season, where it took him forever to get a goal, and then he got going, and now it's been a little bit different. He started out getting some goals in the month of October, then obviously the month of November has been a huge drought in terms of scoring, as he didn't get any goals. But I would look for him to pick up, hopefully this month. And even with him not picking up, it's not like the Ducks are playing terrible. I mean, the Ducks have still been fighting it out. They've been in the top 3 of the Pacific. They're doing better than they did last year too, as well. So I am a little concerned that he hasn't scored as much, but I do think that it's going to get better down the road. Another area that has been brought up about the Ducks, Clarissa asks about, and this is something that was an issue last year as well too, was a 3-on-3 play, which again this season has been an issue too. The Ducks, obviously we talked about they lost this last week to the Oilers on the 3-on-3, and this season the Ducks haven't even won in the overtime. They've lost every time they've gone into the overtime, with only one time they went to that shootout, which we all know that the Ducks got ripped off in that one against the Islanders. But in terms of the overtimes, they don't get the job done. And Clarissa asked, what do the Ducks need to do to improve? What are they doing wrong necessarily? And it kind of goes in line with what you said about Perry. I think in the 3-on-3, the Ducks win the faceoffs. We've talked about this. They're great 5-on-5, 4-on-4, 3-on-3. Whatever the case is in terms of winning the draws in the dot. But the problem is they're not cashing in and burying their chances. And I think it was really disappointing in this game against the Oilers because they started that overtime with a little over a minute of 4-on-3, and they couldn't get it done. So, to me, that's kind of the issue. Is I think the Ducks need to work on setting up some plays during 3-on-3 and just execution. I think that's been the key, Eddie, because it seems like they win the faceoff, they get a chance, they blow it, then the other team comes down on some kind of an odd man rush, and it's just game over.
Yeah, and it's hard to really predict success in overtime. Obviously, it's been really bad for them this season. You look at some teams have done good. Philadelphia lately has done really good in overtime. The Kings have done really good in overtime lately too, and it really just comes down to the speed of play and the precision of the plays that you make in overtime. And what we've seen from the Ducks is, especially on the power play against the Oilers, is they're waiting for that perfect pass, and they're playing a slow kind of build up game that works really really well in 5-on-5 or 5-on-4, but in 3-on-3 you've got to be quicker on your feet. And no offense again to Getzlaf and Perry, but when they're out there, you can't always slow everything down in 3-on-3. Yes, you have more ice, but the game, if you make one mistake, you got to go back up the other way. So yep. I think it just comes down to getting the right guys on the ice. Practice. I mean, it's cliche, but really, I think this is something they really need to focus on now. I mean, at the beginning of the season, okay, yeah, they've lost 3 or whatever, and it's embarrassing, but okay. But now it's 5. I think it's 0-5 in overtime, and then lost again in the shootout. I mean, the shootout one, yeah, that was a little bit of a questionable one. They should have probably won that because of the Thomas Hickey goal. But for the ones in overtime, those are all their fault. They've had chances in those ones for sure, and they haven't been able to bury them, and it's something they've got to work on for sure, because that's 5 points you're missed out on right now. If you have those 5 points, you're first in the Pacific Division, and you're laughing right now. But I mean, even if you have half of those points, you're closer up to the Sharks and the Oilers. So, you're giving away free points right now. So yeah, it seems minimal to say, oh yeah, they just have to improve in overtime. But the more points you give up, the less chance you have of making the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the only other thing I can suggest is don't go to overtime. Win the game in regulation. Don't let it get to that point. Which, I mean, granted, the Ducks have only gotten there a handful of times. Let's be real. They've actually, most of the games have been either won or lost in regulation. But all joking aside, no, I agree with you. I think part of it is the personnel stuff. I mean, you do see Getzlaf out there. And I think part of the issue when he's out there, like you said, is he's trying to set up a play and do a perfect pass or a perfect situation. You don't really need that. You just need to get it down there, create your chances and try and go with it. And if you don't, you got to make sure you have guys on the ice that can get back. Perry and Getzlaf aren't the guys on the ice that are going to get back in time for you. So, it's something that they got to look at in the overtime. I would have Fowler out there, Kessler out there, Cogliano, Silfverberg, Raquel. Those are the guys I'd be throwing out there. Lindholm, those are the kind of guys that I'd be making my, lineups as far as, my 3 guys. But that's the way I would look at it. Hopefully they don't go to overtime too much, because they didn't do well last year and they're not doing well this year. But with that, we got a couple more questions we'll get to real quick. We've got a couple people asking about trades again. Obviously, the trade deadline's still a little bit away. We have Alex asks about, if the Ducks, and also ties into the expansion draft as well, which we've talked about in the last couple shows. But, he asks about the Ducks trying to get a left winger. If that's still in the cards. We also have Eddie Richard asks about, it's kind of a rumor we heard before, but if Landeskog is going to be traded from Colorado, possibly for Fowler, if that's something that we've heard. I haven't heard anything like that lately. I mean, that came up before, but it's still, obviously a little early, as we talked about with Dupre and Thompson and all those kind of issues in the cap and everything. But I still think that that's something the Ducks do need to do, Eddie, in terms of this team. I still believe this team will finish in the top of the Pacific. I still think this team can make the playoffs. But if this team really wants to make a push, then yeah, they're going to have to make a move to get another forward for sure that can score.
Yeah, they've been sitting around middle of the pack, 15, 16, 14 in goals per game throughout the season so far, and the big part of their play early on was their goals against per game. They're in the top 10. Obviously, with that 8-3 thrashing, they've dropped down to 12th right now, but I mean, it is something they need to work on. I mean, they're getting increased production from Kessler, something we didn't expect him to have 11 goals and lead the team right now. It's helping with the fact that Perry isn't scoring, but even with Perry scoring, I think they still need to try and get that guy. It doesn't need to be a superstar, and obviously the rumors. I haven't heard anything about Landeskog this year, but we heard about it last year. There was a
Right.
whole debacle we had one night on Twitter where somebody was rumoring that Landeskog was coming, or that Colorado and Anaheim were going to make a trade, and it was Landeskog, then it was Duchesne, and then it was this guy and that guy's. But I haven't heard anything since the start of the season, or even a little bit into the first week, referring to Ducks trades, especially since Lindholm has been signed. I haven't heard anything in regards to Fowler or Vatanen or Lindholm being traded. So it's all quiet on that front. But yeah, I think they do need to add somebody. I mean, you look at the Oilers; they've been fairly consistent this season. They've kind of tailed off a bit, but you expect them to make a push for the playoffs. The Sharks have been very good this season. They look likely to finish in the top of the Pacific Division so far. Calgary lately, they've won their last four. Goodrow's back from injury. We expected them to be good this year. They weren't getting the goaltending that they needed, but now Chad Johnson has stepped up, and he's been phenomenal for them lately, and they're winning games. And they're making a threat right now to get back into the mix. And obviously the Kings, you can never count them out. They don't have Jonathan Quick right now. They don't have him for a while, but they're still a team that is going to find ways to win games. So the Pacific Division is going to be tight this year. I mean, you could probably throw the Arizona Coyotes and the Vancouver Canucks out the window, but then you still have those five teams. The Ducks have to fight with four other teams for those spots. So, adding a winger can definitely help, but again, I don't see it really happening until the trade deadline.
Yeah, I agree with you, and like you said with the division, it's a tight battle right now. I mean, I still think that they can pull it out and be one of the top three teams, but by no means is it going to be easy. I mean, with the way that we've seen these games go, you just don't know what's going to happen on any given night. I mean, you see him beat the league's best, Montreal 2-1, and then you see him get smoked literally by the Flames, 8-3. So I think adding that, getting a little bit more scoring in there has definitely been needed for them, to solidify one of those top three spots. Because I mean, you don't know if four teams will make it. The Central Division is pretty competitive too, so maybe five out of that division and three out of the Pacific again, like it was last year. I mean, it's still way too early, but just by looking at what we're going by right now, so we'll see what happens. A couple months away from the trade deadline, and we'll keep you updated on that front as well. And we also had some more questions on the expansion draft. We're not really going to cover that. We've covered it in the last couple shows. So for those of you that have any questions about it, you can go back and listen to that. As it gets closer, we will talk about it more and more. But for now, we're going to hold off on that. But we will talk about the Las Vegas team. They were in the news recently, Eddie. We talked about them, being named the Vegas Golden Knights. And it looks like the U.S. Army, is not too happy about that. There's a recent report that they're looking into the name because the Golden Knights is also the name of their parachute team. So that's an issue that's come up. Nothing has been determined or resolved yet, but it's an interesting situation, Eddie, because they came up with this name. And according to the reports, the Army wasn't really talked to or advised about this name. So, I don't know what's going to happen, but, it's they're not happy.
Yeah, I don't really know how this works. We haven't seen it really happen that often. When we know early on they had issues with the London Knights overusing the word Knights, and now, of course, using Golden Knights, and the fact that it's the exact same thing the Army has for the parachute division. It's interesting. It is really interesting because they've already announced this. They've already got the logo, and if this ends up going against them and they have to change this, it's all new ground and new territory we haven't seen. And do they really have a backup plan? I mean, once you settle on a name, and you've got it out there already. You've probably sold merchandise already. You've sold hats. You've sold everything. You haven't revealed the jerseys yet, and but still, you've got it out there, and you've got this as the face of your franchise, and this is your name, and you've already announced it to the world. And then if for some reason you have to change it because of a lawsuit, it'll be disappointing for them. And I'm not a huge fan of the name and the logo to begin with, but I don't want to say it's petty because I feel like they do have a right to fight it. They probably should have done more research and looked into it, and it is the Golden Knights parachute division, so they should have contacted them and asked their permission to use it. But in the end, it's not hurting anybody using it. It's not degrading anybody by using it. It's not degrading the U.S. Army by using it. I feel like they can investigate it if they want, but if they really make them take away the name, I feel like that's a little bit harsh for what it really is.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's kind of a touchy situation. I mean, it's kind of funny because when I think about this, I actually think back to starting Ducks and Pucks, and I think about coming up with this name. And I remember sitting down with one of my friends trying to come up with a name. And this is kind of advice for any one of you out there that's trying to start, a blog, a news site, a clothing brand, a team, whatever it is you're trying to start. Just do your research. I mean, it's not easy because I don't even remember all the other names that I had come up with and things I had looked up. And I had gone around and looked on the internet and talked to people and found, oh, great, this name's being used and this name's being used. And, maybe the Army doesn't have the parachute team name, trademarked or whatever. And maybe it is a little bit, petty if they try to really make a big stink about this. But at the same time, Vegas, they didn't go talk to him. At least that's what the report says, if that's what's really happened. So if that's the case, I mean, it's kind of more of a, lack of respect, communication kind of issue in that realm. So it's just difficult. I think you just have to do the research and be careful because that's what I ended up doing. And I didn't see Ducks and Pucks anywhere. I was able to grab all the accounts. I remember there was one person that did have it on Twitter. Ended up talking to that person. They, if you remember, we weren't even Ducks and Pucks originally on Twitter. We were Ducks and Pucks 93 way back in the beginning when nobody knew who we were. And, I ended up talking to that person and working it out. So those things come up and they're problematic now. And it's just really difficult in today's society to come up with an original name for anything. I mean, how many teams have lions and tigers and all these other, mascots? So I don't think the Army will push them too hard and it'll be a problem. I think it'll get resolved. But if it's not, man, what a big mess, Eddie.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be ridiculous. I mean, you would expect the team to do some kind of background check on the name. And we don't know if they had already known about this or not with the U.S. Army and the fact that there was it, or maybe they just thought, hey, it's not going to be that big of an issue if we go ahead for it. But, they obviously did their due diligence with the London Knights and had issues with them and having just
True.
Knights as their name. But, to miss this and to not talk, like there's obviously there was no communication, and that's why this is being investigated, because if there was communication and they allowed it, then we wouldn't be dealing with this right now. But it's just poor management, really. I mean, you're using a name, like you said, you looked at every avenue you could to make sure you weren't copying it from somebody else. And the fact that they settle on Golden Knights as their name, and they're going to use this and broadcast it and put their name on it and put it out and sell it for merchandise and everything like that, and they didn't really look it up and find out if anybody else was using this for anything, not just sports teams or anything like that, but using this for anything. They didn't really look it up. I mean, it probably just takes one Google search. Just search Golden Knights, and you can find a bunch of different things, especially before, when you were behind the scenes, before you even had announced this. There would have been a lot less searches for Golden Knights, and you probably could have figured it out and contacted them, but I don't know. It would be a mess. It'd be ridiculous, and it'd be something we've never seen before in the NHL.
Yeah, I agree. And all I can say is stay tuned until, something else comes out about that. And going from one conflict to another conflict, our old boy, Pat Maroon was in the news recently, and if you watched the Edmonton Oilers take on the Minnesota Wild, you saw that McDavid took a trip where he ended up falling, landing, kind of chest first on his jaw on the ice. And the whole issue, obviously, that has been a big topic in the NHL and the NFL, and starting to spread around a lot of other sports, is concussions and whatnot, and being checked out, and that whole basic process and everything that's going on now. Pat Maroon in a post game interview talked about it being a man's game, which it just blew up on the internet. I mean, he just got blasted for his comments because some people took it as being sexist and all these other things. And then he put out a response, which he then deleted, in which he was saying that he wasn't talking about that. He's more talking about, just the sport of hockey and how it's a physical game, which is what I took it as. I took it more as, hockey is a physical game as opposed to, men versus boys kind of a thing, not men and women. But I don't know. It got all blown up, and this was just a crazy thing, Eddie, that happened. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of on the middle on this one. I mean, I don't really think he said anything necessarily wrong. Obviously, you got to be careful with what you say. But I also thought the media kind of ran with this, and I don't know. I just felt like it just got carried away, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I mean, you, as an athlete and as anybody who has a presence in the media, you have to know what you're saying and how it's going to affect people. But they did take this and run with it and kind of spew it in a nasty direction. I mean, by no means did he mean that hockey's a man's game in general and that women can't play it. That wasn't even the context of the conversation anyway. He was talking about McDavid and the fact with the concussions and everything like that, and that he got pulled off the ice. I mean, if anything, they could have taken it as him saying you should fight through the pain and concussions and keep going. Then
Right.
that would have made sense. That would have made sense because that's essentially what he was saying.
Right.
But in no part of that conversation between the interviewee and Patrick Maroon was women's hockey brought up at all. So I don't see why. I mean, I can understand how the comment could maybe not sit well with women's hockey players and anybody who supports women's hockey. I mean, I support women's hockey too, but I don't see it as I see it like you saw it as it's a man versus boys. Like this is a man's game. I mean, they can fight through the pain where they're not babies, they're not boys. They're not playing minor hockey. They can fight through the pain and they should be able to deal with it. And if they had taken that and said, well, that's not okay, we got to make sure they're healthy and okay, look at all the issues with concussions, how could you say that? Then that's fine. Then he would deserve that criticism. But the fact that he was criticized for being sexist and this and that, I mean, that was a little bit over the top. I don't think he deserved that type of criticism.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just don't think that was really the issue. To me, and this is, like I said earlier, it's going across in other sports, especially, in professional football, and a lot of other contact sports as well, is the whole concussion thing. And I think the issue here is it's balance. Are we protecting the players, doing these concussion protocols, making sure that they're taken care of, but at the same time, are we not being overreactive and protecting people for every single bump and bruise that they get? And I think it's difficult. I think it's a very hot topic. We've seen it, all these new rules coming into place in the last several years to protect the players, sometimes against themselves too, because they just want to run back out there on the ice or the football field or whatever it is and play, which is a normal instinct. I've been there. I know what it's like to get your bell rung and then to get up and be like, hey, I'm fine. I'm going back out there. And that happened to me in a football game. And the coach pulled me out and I had to sit out for a little while. Even though I felt fine, I was ready to go. That's what they did. I didn't agree with it at the time, but later on, it was the right thing to do. So, I just think that that's what the whole issue is. And I think Maroon was more upset with, we're pulling out people all the time for every little thing that happens now. And that's what I think the whole nature of this discussion was. It has nothing to do with men and women at all in professional sports. At least that's the way I took it and the way that the play happened and whatnot. I just think it's this whole balancing act that we have to do, of letting players want to play, but also protecting them and making sure that that they don't have these career-ending injuries and also life, debilitating or threatening injuries as well.
Yeah, and I think it's disappointing as a team aspect, especially when it's your best player, and for him to say he's okay and then to be pulled off the ice. So I can see why he is disappointed in that aspect. I mean, did they end up losing that game? I think they ended up losing that game. So I can see why he would be disappointed, and you lose your best player for you don't know how long during that game. Then you got to play without him, and for him, I mean, he benefits a lot from having McDavid on the ice, that's for sure. So, but I think they actually did a good job. I think the concussion spotters saw the impact. He fell and face planted the ice.
Yeah.
I think it's good for them to say, okay, hey, he might look okay, but that's a play where you could get a concussion. We should pull him aside, spend 5 minutes or so just to see if he's okay and ready to go back out there, and make sure he's 100% ready to go. Because if you're not, and you send him back out there, you're jeopardizing this guy's career. If you send him back out there when he's concussed, and we've seen it happen with Paul Kariya, we've seen it happen with Eric Lindros back in the day when they didn't regulate this, and their careers ended early. I mean, Paul Kariya is a prime example of that. His career ended way too early. So I mean, I think it was a good call for them to pull him off the ice. Of course, when you're a player on your team and you see your best player get pulled off the ice, and he says he's okay, and you would think that he'd be okay. It's disappointing, but you got to look at it long term and say, what if he wasn't okay, and they left him on the ice, and it had long term effects, and then he's out for longer than just 5 to 10 minutes in a game.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I mean, this is a regular season game too, that not a big deal. It wasn't like the Stanley Cup final when the Ducks, played the Devils with Korea, which was, I'm not saying that it should have been different back then, but it would have been with the way the rules were. But don't forget when Korea got knocked out, he came back in and scored. So it's interesting if it would have, if when it comes playoff time, how these are going to happen too. These decisions are going to be very important. But I mean, I agree with you overall. I mean, you got to protect these people. I mean, you have McDavid that's, super early in his career. You don't want him to have it shortened, like as you mentioned, with Korea or some of these other players as well. But yeah, and your other little point there, yeah, Minnesota did go on to win that game. They won 2-1, just in case anybody was wondering. Some quick other little updates before we wrap up this show. Going back to some of our other former Ducks, more former. We have Travis Moan. He ended up retiring. Remember he was on the Stanley Cup team back in 2007. You also had J.S. Giguère. He went to the Hall of Fame for the Quebec Junior Hockey League. So a couple of those names came up too in the news recently. Of course, both of them on the Stanley Cup champion team. And, just little updates there already. Obviously two other guys that were key to the Ducks' success, back in that season, and, obviously in a few other seasons as well.
Yeah, and it's it's nice to see these guys get rewarded. Obviously, Travis Moan had a hard-fought career. He played in a time where you needed enforcers on your team, and they played an important role. And he played an important role for the Ducks in their Stanley Cup run as well. So I think it's nice to see him. Obviously, it's not nice to see his career come to an end, but for him to retire on his own terms, especially playing the role that he did, where he didn't have to end his career because he couldn't play hockey anymore. So it's nice to see him get arrested and be able to do that. And then for Giguère, I mean, for the matter of time, really. I mean, he's a legendary goalie in the NHL. I mean, I'm surprised he hadn't already been inducted into the QMJHL Hall of Fame already. So it's a great honor for him. And especially we see a lot of him with him being part of the Ducks broadcast now. So it's nice to see him get honored in that sense.
Yeah, and with that, we'll wrap up the show. Speaking of all-star type players, don't forget the all-star voting is open for the team captains. So you can go to NHL.com. You can vote. Obviously, you'd want to vote for the Ducks. Maybe Fowler, Kessler, Getzlaf. One of those guys. There's only a couple players per each team that are on there, but you can go on there and vote for each of the divisions. So make sure to check that out. And with that, we'll wrap up the show. We'll be back next week covering all the action and all the news around the league, and of course with the goals too in San Diego as well. And thanks for joining us. And let's go Ducks.